Okay, guys, we're going to pick up where we left off, still dealing with the categories of classification. Systematics helps biologists better understand the variety of life, all the different life forms on Earth. Organisms we know that are placed in the same genus are most closely related than those that are in separate domains. So, in other words, we know that we are not related to, for example, those organisms that are in the domain bacteria or the domain archaea, not as closely related, so more distantly related. Therefore, all eukaryotes are more closely related to one another than they are, again, to those other guys, bacteria and archaea. Similarly, all animals are more closely related to one another than, for example, we are even to plants. So we're classified according to their presumed evolutionary relationships. And research done by systematists may result in changes to the current classification system. So here's an example of the classification of humans, the domain, eukarya, cells with nuclei, supergroup, Opisthokonta, possess cells with a flagella, kingdom, Animalia, multicellular, motile, ingestion of food, phylum, Chordata, class, Mammalia, order, primates, family, Hominidae, genus, Homo, species would be sapiens, and we are Homo sapiens. All right. Now, for scientific names, remember we said that Carolus Linnaeus was basically the father of taxonomy, who came up with this two-part naming system that's called binomial nomenclature. Okay, binomial nomenclature, and binomial nomenclature uses two names, and that's the genus name as well as the species name. Always note that the genus name is capitalized, the species name is not capitalized, but note that both words are italicized, okay? So at the bottom you can see we have an example, Homo sapiens, Pisum savidum, and Felis domesticus. That is your cat. The Pisum savidum, that is your peas, and then Homo sapiens, those are the humans. All right, the process of science. We know that biology itself is a study of life. Biologists and all scientists, we know that they generally will test the hypothesis using the scientific method. And if you remember, the scientific method has several steps, usually observation, a hypothesis, then you experiment, and then you analyze your data, then you form some type of conclusion. Again, at the top, the observation. You observe something happening. And then based on that knowledge that you have observed, then you formulate some type of hypothesis using inductive reasoning. And then you want to use deductive reasoning to predict basically what will happen, okay? And then you formulate an experiment, and then from that experiment, then you're going to eventually form some type of conclusion, okay? So again, scientists definitely tend to be very curious about things that they see occurring and in nature and how the world works, and that natural phenomena that's occurring may be better understood by observing and studying them. So scientists basically use their senses about what they're seeing happening, and they make these observations, and then they can extend their abilities of these observations by using tools. For example, when the microscope was developed. Um, that allows us to see structures that we definitely could not see with the naked eye. So we use instruments to help further our observations. Again, we said we're going to use inductive reasoning. That basically occurs when one uses creative thinking to combine isolated facts into a cohesive whole. So basically, what we're doing when we do that is formulating this hypothesis based on the current knowledge that we have on the things that we have observed. So a scientist states a hypothesis, which is basically this explanation for the event that we saw taking place. Now, anytime we formulate a hypothesis, we know that the hypothesis should be falsifiable, and it is basically an informed statement that can also be tested. So we need to be able to test whatever it is, the hypothesis that we've created. And the other thing that's always going to affect a hypothesis is the fact that whatever the scientist's background is, whatever his past experiences or her past experiences are, they may influence the formation of that hypothesis. So to determine how to test the hypothesis, scientists also use deductive reasoning. Basically what we're saying is an if-then type of logic. So if this is, say for instance, if an organism is composed of cells, then after we've examined it, then it should reveal that that particular organism had cells. So one can also imply the scientist has made a prediction, okay? So in order to test their hypothesis, again, when we conduct experiments, we use an experimental design. Okay, so in that experimental design, you usually have a control group, you have an experimental variable, as well as a dependent or responding variable. The experimental variable is the actual factor that's being tested, okay? The experimental variable, and another word that we can use for experimental variable is independent variable, okay? That's the factor that's being tested. That's what the scientists can actually manipulate. The time, how much oil, how much of this or whatever. So that's the experimental variable. The dependent variable, that's the actual result or change. So the experimental variable, we know is always going to be on the x-axis. The dependent or responding variable will always be on the y-axis. So that's the result or change based on the experimental variable. And then again, we always have a control group, and the control group, we do everything except for exposing it to the experimental variable that we're actually testing. So a lot of times, the control group, one group is gonna receive the actual thing that's being tested, then the other one will actually get water or some type of placebo, okay? Salt, sugar, whatever. Alright, so experiments and control studies usually again have two groups. The control group, remember, gets everything done to it exactly, except it receives none of the treatment, and then the experimental group will actually receive the treatment. So again, we said the control group is most likely they're gonna receive the placebo, and the experimental group will actually receive whatever that treatment is. Scientists often use models, and that's a representation of the actual subject. We know, for example, you can use fruit fly to test a mouse, a pig, these model organisms. And then, once we've done these tests on these model organisms, we know that if we're testing out a particular drug, for example, to see if it's going to cure a particular disease, we know that we're still going to have to take those, even after we've done it on a mouse, pig, whatever. We know that we're going to have to take those tests out to the public, to the human, for example. If we're trying to find out if this particular drug is going to cure this disease, we know that we actually also have to have test groups of humans. Many times, and it's sad to say, people that have been incarcerated are used as those human subjects against their will. And so, anyway, but that does happen. You would think that people always, there's some studies that ask for volunteers, but that's not always the case. Those folk that are incarcerated may get these treatments. Okay. Then we also have model systems, computer modeling, for example, to study climate change. But even though they do the computer modeling, they're still going to eventually have to go to the field to test out that computer modeling. Said that this is going to happen, but we got to go out and look and see actually what's happening in the field. Preparing and then analyzing the data. One of the things that a scientist always wants to do, and that is to record numbers instead of words. We know that words are subjective. If I ask you for some M&Ms, and I say I want a few of your M&Ms, a few to you might be 3 M&Ms, but a few to me might be 10 M&Ms. Okay, so we never want to use words. We always want to use numbers, because we know that if we use a number, it can be presented in a variety of formats, such as a table, a graph, or whatever. And then statistics will help us to evaluate that data. So the standard area, or the standard deviation, that's going to measure the uncertainty of the value that we have come up with. Okay, and that statistical significance is going to determine whether results were due to chance or not. So scientific studies are usually written up, we know, as research papers. When I worked for NASA, that was one of the things that we did. Not only did we use others' works in our observations to see what other people were doing, but then we would have to write up the research that we found. That's one of the things that I didn't mention early on, but during we observe something going on in nature, and then we look to see what other scientists have seen as well, and read some of their papers. But then once we've done our scientific studies, then we need to write them up in research papers, and then some of them are submitted in scientific journals. I need to go out and see if I'm sure some of my papers are in scientific journals. All right, so the other thing that generally happens is that anytime you submit a scientific paper, it's not just going to immediately be accepted. It has to be reviewed by other experts, and the fact is that it may be rejected and back to you, and you may have to go back and do some revisions, and then after those revisions, the scientific studies may be accepted for publication in scientific journals. Scientific theories are concepts that join well supported and related hypotheses. Just because you've done some research, that doesn't mean that is going to become a scientific theory. Okay, it has to be well supported, and I'm talking about lots and lots of support. Okay, before it become a particular theory. So in science, a theory supported again by a broad range of observation, not one or two, but I mean many observations, experiments, as well as data. So some of the examples that we have for scientific theory are cell theory. All organisms that are considered alive are made of cells. Okay, the homeostasis. That remember, homeostasis means that all organisms maintain some type of internal conditions within certain boundaries. And then evolution, and that's that things change over time. So the theory of evolution is the unifying concept, basically, of biology. And what I want to do is stop right now because I have gone over my time for this video, and I'll come back in a separate video and finish up this chapter.